Iran has so many different threat vectors that attack the Western world, to include the U.S., that to effectively restrain their ability to continue to cause chaos, we have to attack all those vectors.
So does that mean the war doesn't end until every single one of those things is eliminated?
Well,
when a politician goes on national television to defend a controversial war, you'd expect them to come prepared, with clear answers, solid reasoning, and at least a coherent argument. But sometimes what we get instead is something very different. And that's exactly what happened in this exchange. Just the other day, CNN's Kaitlan Collins sat down with Senator Markwayne Mullin and absolutely dismantled his explanation for why Donald Trump believes the United States should be pulled into yet another long and complicated conflict, this time involving Iran. The reasoning was shaky, the talking points were all over the place, and the interview quickly turned into a moment that had people across the political spectrum raising their eyebrows. But apparently that wasn't the end of it. Because soon after, another Republican voice stepped forward to defend the same policy. This time it was Senator Tim Sheehy, a former Navy SEAL and member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, appearing on Collins' show to explain and justify the administration's approach in the Middle East. And let's just say, the conversation got interesting. What makes this exchange worth watching isn't just the policy debate itself. It's the tension between a journalist asking very direct, very basic questions, and a politician trying to navigate a complicated narrative about why the United States might be escalating toward a larger conflict in the region. Are we talking about stopping terrorism? Is this about protecting allies? Is it about military deterrence? Or, as some comments during the interview suggest, is this ultimately about regime change in Iran? Those are very different explanations. And when multiple answers start appearing at the same time, it raises a bigger question. Does anyone in Washington actually agree on the real objective? That's where Kaitlan Collins steps in. Throughout the conversation, she presses for clarity, asking the kinds of questions many viewers at home are probably asking themselves. If the United States is heading toward another major confrontation in the Middle East, people want to understand the reasoning. They want to know what the goal is and how this ends. In this video, we're going to break down several moments from that interview between Senator Tim Sheehy and Kaitlan Collins. We'll walk through the arguments, the responses, and the points where the conversation becomes especially revealing. Because sometimes a short interview can say a lot more about the political moment we're in than 100 speeches ever could. Like the video and subscribe right now. I've got some strong thoughts on this exchange. Let's take a closer look at this clip.
Joining me now is a retired Navy SEAL who serves on the Senate Armed Services Committee. Republican Senator Tim Sheehy is here. And thank you. When you see what's happening with what Clarissa is reporting, we saw the attacks on the embassy in Riyadh tonight. Are you worried about how much this is expanding throughout the Middle East and what we're seeing and how Iran is retaliating?
Well, of course, we're always going to be worried about the safety of our allies and our servicemen in the region, and of course, all Americans there. The reality, though, is what this illustrates is just the tentacles of the Iranian influence that have been throughout the region, really for thousands of years. I mean, this is Persia at the end of the day, and the history of this region shows that Persia has historically been, the fulcrum of this entire region. And in the last 46 years, unfortunately, that's turned into a theocratic, oppressive, terrorist regime that has been murdering Americans for 46 years. So I think the fact that this conflict that has been going on for a half century is spreading into every neighboring country is pretty much what everyone expected. Most of the Gulf state allies and our allies in the region, like Jordan, like Saudi Arabia, quite frankly, have long wanted this regime to finally be taken off the map, and I think it's high time it's happened. It's going to be a hard fight. No one thought this was going to be a 3-day campaign, but it's about time we take this threat off the table.
Is that why you think the war in Iran is happening right now? Is it because of regime change?
I think that's pretty clear. There's no question that what's happening in Iran today is a result of decades of exporting terror and evil all over the world. Let's not forget this regime started by taking our embassy hostage, and subsequently, over the subsequent decades, bipartisan. This isn't a Republican-Democrat issue, Kaitlan. This is an American issue. This is a Western free world issue. Whether it's the Iranian embassy in London that they took in 1980 after they took ours, or the 1983 barracks bombing, the Khobar Towers, the USS Cole, being the primary provider of cheap oil to China to allow China.
Yeah, no one is saying Iran has been doing good things. I mean, the Iranian leadership. But
well, there's actually quite a few Democrats and folks who are defending the Ayatollah's right to continue to rule and defending his existence. So I think
who is defending the Ayatollah?
Well, let's see. We've had Elizabeth Warren's former campaign manager out there literally chanting "Death to America" on stage yesterday.
I don't know who that is, but Elizabeth Warren is not defending the Ayatollah. But the reason
we've got Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib who are saying that this is wrong. Actually, with the New York Times publishing an obituary describing me as an avuncular cleric.
I think that was the Washington Post. But again, that's not a lawmaker. That's not a Democrat who is saying that this is what they did. But the reason I ask why this is happening is because we hear a bunch of different reasons from the administration. It doesn't seem like there's anyone settled on one reason. I mean, you just said regime change. Secretary Hegg said this morning it's not a regime change war.
I think the reason you're hearing so many varied reasons, the varied threats this regime presents. You heard about taking out their Navy. Their Navy has been used to shut down the Red Sea, the Straits of Hormuz, Suez Canal, the Houthi rebels, which are an extension of a militant group of Iran. You've got Hezbollah, which has been using its northern border with Israel to constantly pressure Israel, and frankly, any Western presence in the Middle East. Hamas, of course, is an attack arm of Iran. You've got their medium-range ballistic missiles, their ICBMs, their nuclear arsenal, their international money laundering campaign for any terrorist organization, and even drug dealing groups. So I think the reason you're hearing different reasons is not because no one's decided what reason it should be, Caitlin. It's because Iran has so many different threat vectors that attack the Western world, to include the U.S., that to effectively restrain their ability to continue to cause chaos, we have to attack all those vectors.
So does that mean the war doesn't end until every single one of those things is eliminated?
Well, you've got the tentacles of the octopus coming out. In order to
but that's kind of a yes or no question. Is it
go.
Once the regime's gone and their naval capability and all of their missiles and any nuclear desires?
Well, I think the likelihood of each one of those tentacles continuing to carry out the policies of this terrorist regime is pretty unlikely if the regime's gone, or if the regime has chosen, hey, we're going to change direction. But I think that's pretty unlikely. For 46 years, obviously, we've only really had two major leaders of this theocracy over the past half century. But this theocracy has been very clear that death to America, death to Israel. We will export terror in the most brutal way possible, torturing our victims to death, whatever it takes, torturing our own people, killing tens of thousands of our own people. So
again, no one is defending Iran's leadership. But I think the question is, if you can't clearly articulate why this started, how do you tell people how it's ending?
How do you not clearly articulate how it started? 1983, 1989, 1980.
Well, I don't remember hearing any Republicans say we should vote for Donald Trump because he's going to go to war with Iran for those reasons. I mean, the president actually ran on not going to war with Iran.
So every single policy decision the president makes has to be the centerpiece of a campaign speech. I think.
Well, I think if you say you're not going to do something and then you do it, I mean, a lot of the president's big allies are saying they're pretty worried about what's actually happening in Iran right now.
Well, I think the reality is America first foreign policy means we're going to stop sending tens and hundreds of billions of dollars to countries that want to kill us. We're going to stop letting a country that murders our people all the time keep doing it. So at what point is enough? At what point are we going to say you are no longer allowed to fire on our ships? You're no longer allowed to start wars in Israel, slaughter 1,200 people in a day. You can no longer launder money for terrorist groups. I mean, the policy towards Iran for the last 46 years essentially has been, we're going to keep giving you money. Just please be nice to us and stop killing people. And it hasn't worked very well. So I think it's pretty clear at this point a change in tack is needed.
Do you support boots on the ground if the president decides that's necessary?
I don't think it's wise. I don't think that's what anyone's planning. I think the reality is decapitating the regime is the number one objective. That, as I said, will have a number of threat vectors, whether it's the fleet, whether it's nukes, whether it's ICBMs, medium range, or taking out proxy groups, whether it's Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, or the remnants of Hamas in Gaza. But weakening all those different vectors makes it harder for that regime to stay in place. And what we are seeing is a lot of organic support inside Iran. Unfortunately, so many of them have been killed over the last couple of months. But hopefully that organic support reaches the point where they can topple their own government and in place their own, hopefully, self-governing system to succeed this.
Do you think the president should help them?
Absolutely.
What would that look like?
Well, there's a number of different ways to do it. I mean, there's a lot of unconventional warfare tactics we have to help support an organic uprising within Iran. That's been going on for the last several months. That this isn't something we have to start from scratch. The Iranian people have made clear, a large portion of them, that they're ready for the theocracy to go. And we can support that in a lot of different ways, from communications to funding to weapons, should they need it.
Senator Tim Sheehy, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Now, when you step back and look at the full exchange, something becomes pretty clear. Senator Tim Sheehy may come across a little more composed than some of the other voices defending this policy, but once you really listen to what he's saying, the substance starts to fall apart pretty quickly. During the interview, Sheehy tried to push a familiar talking point. He suggested that Democrats, or critics of this military escalation, are somehow cheering on the Ayatollah, and that's where Kaitlan Collins immediately pushed back. Her response was simple but powerful. Who exactly is doing that? Because that's the key question. Criticizing a military decision is not the same thing as supporting a foreign government. Saying a war might be the wrong move does not suddenly mean someone is endorsing the leadership of Iran. But in political debates like this, that distinction often gets blurred. Sheehy attempted to bring up the names of lawmakers like Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, but even in that moment, he never actually pointed to them praising Iran's leadership. What he was really referring to were statements questioning whether escalating into a larger conflict was the right choice. And that raises an important point. If someone believes a military action could be a mistake, does that automatically mean they are supporting the opposing government? Of course not. In fact, a large number of Americans often question major military decisions before they happen. That's part of democratic debate. So when that argument gets framed as anyone questioning this must be siding with the enemy, it starts to sound less like a serious policy discussion and more like a political talking point. Another moment in the interview stood out as well. Sheehy repeatedly referenced the long history of tensions between Iran and the United States, saying that Iran has been involved in hostile actions for decades. At one point, he referred to a timeline of roughly 46 years. But the examples he cited were events from decades ago, the early 1980s, the late 1980s. Historical events that everyone acknowledges were serious, but they also raise an obvious question. If those events are the central justification for military escalation today, why now? That's a question many viewers have been asking. If the argument is that Iran has been a major threat for decades, then why is this confrontation happening at this particular moment? Why didn't similar action happen earlier? Why not during previous administrations? Why not during earlier moments when tensions were also high? Those are the kinds of questions Kaitlan Collins kept returning to during the interview. And to her credit, she didn't simply move on when the answers became vague. One especially revealing moment came when she asked directly about the objective of this conflict. Is the goal deterrence? Is it stopping specific threats? Or is it ultimately about regime change in Iran? Because those are very different strategies. At first, she seemed to suggest that removing the regime might be part of the outcome. But when Collins pressed further, the answer became less clear. Suddenly, the explanation shifted toward multiple threats, multiple goals, multiple justifications. And when the reasoning becomes that broad, it can start to sound like there isn't one clearly defined objective at all. Another key part of the discussion focused on the idea of America First foreign policy. Sheehy argued that the United States should stop allowing hostile actors to harm American interests and allies. That's a position many people across the political spectrum would agree with in principle. But again, the question becomes how that policy is applied, and whether a new military conflict actually moves the country closer to long-term stability. Collins also raised the issue that many voters had heard during past campaigns, promises about avoiding new wars and reducing foreign entanglements. When leaders campaign on avoiding conflicts but later move toward one, it's natural for journalists and voters to ask for clarification. That's exactly what happened here. And then came another crucial question: boots on the ground. When Collins asked whether American troops might eventually be deployed, Sheehy tried to signal that it wasn't the plan right now, but he also didn't completely close the door on that possibility. Instead, the answer shifted toward weakening the Iranian government through various pressures and supporting internal opposition. Again, that introduces another layer of complexity, because historically, when conflicts escalate step by step, the line between limited action and deeper involvement can become blurry. That's why questions like these matter. And whether you agree with Kaitlan Collins or Senator Sheehy politically, the interview itself shows how important it is for public officials to clearly explain the reasoning behind major foreign policy decisions, especially ones that could lead to long-term consequences. At the end of the day, viewers will come to their own conclusions about who made the stronger case in this exchange. Did Senator Sheehy successfully explain why this confrontation is necessary? Or did Kaitlan Collins expose gaps in the argument by asking the questions many Americans are already thinking about? That's something I'm curious to hear from you. What did you think about this exchange? Do you think Collins held her ground in this interview, or do you believe Sheehy made a convincing case? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more discussions like this.